So the reason I'm doing this video is because I did another video about Dahmer, and a lot of people were questioning it. To be fair, I did jump on the Dahmer bandwagon, having some pre-knowledge of the situation, and I made some claims which probably sound pretty crazy to most people, and I didn't supply a whole lot of supporting evidence. So, guilty as charged on that one. The main supporting evidence I did supply is to go read Dave McGowan's book, because it's not just about Dahmer. Dahmer is a small part of the picture, and it gets very scary. And the thing is, a lot of people consume this serial killer stuff as entertainment, much in the same way they consume the soft white underbelly stuff as entertainment. It becomes like these cult followings with the people, and they, like Charles Manson on people's t-shirts. Perfect example. And they start collecting, all these movies and articles, and except the movies and the articles all come from the same media companies that own everything on our planet. So you never hear the other side of the story. So yeah, it does sound crazy because you've been hearing the same narrative about these serial killers your whole life. You've been fed these serial killers as entertainment over and over and over again, Hannibal Lecter and all of the rest. And yet, the real truth about what they are is so far away from what you've been told. So I'm going to read a little bit from McGowan's book, but first, let's ask ourselves why people are so willing to engage with serial killers as a form of entertainment. And yet, the minute someone like me comes along and says something, they're all rushing, seemingly almost to defend the serial killers from the bad old conspiracy theorists who just have to turn everything into a conspiracy. Isn't it interesting how it's okay to engage with the actual disgustingness of these crimes and get into all the gory details, but it's not okay to ask why it's all happening? So, do you want to know is the question I want to ask you before you go any further in this video. A lot of my audience are soft white underbelly fans or ex-fans or just curious about the situation, or even BJ fans, people who are caring may not want to really know about what I'm about to talk about, because we're at a weird intersection of society where the mainstream is now colliding into the conspiracy world. And you have mainstream people like BJ, who is a lawyer. She believes in the law, she believes in the system, and yet now she's into this conspiracy world, dragged into it or jumped into, however you want to put it. But she's uncovering conspiracies, whether she realizes it to the full extent or not. And that's why she's going to be called a conspiracy theorist. And so that's my little disclaimer. Don't watch any further unless you want to know. The evidence that you're asking me for from the last video, I'm going to give you some of it today. Before I start reading from the Dahmer's chapter, let me first give you a little something for the people who are never going to read this book, who are just don't have the time to read a book nor the inclination. The serial killer phenomenon can be compared to the school shooter phenomenon. The school shooter phenomenon goes back to Columbine. Prior to Columbine, there were school shootings. There had been school shootings in the past, but it wasn't a thing. It wasn't a movement. It became a movement after Columbine, when they were given the media fame, and all these kids now feel like that they're going to be looked up to the same way they looked up to Dylan and Klebold, whatever their names were. And so that is the lineage as far as the motivation for these mind-controlled kids, why they think they're doing it, right? They're being manipulated really into doing it. But in their minds, they want to be the next Columbine. They want to be famous. They want to be looked at as powerful with their guns in hand. And so the serial killer phenomenon is the same in that it can be traced to a single event. Prior to Columbine, there were only a handful of school shootings. Ever since, more and more and more and more. Prior to the event that I'm about to mention, there were very few serial killings. After the event that I'm about to mention, ever since, more and more and more and more and more. That right there should give any statistically minded person a moment of pause. What is the event? What is the Columbine of the serial killers? It's the Vietnam War. Prior to Vietnam, the serial killer phenomenon had not become a thing. It hadn't become a trend. And it wasn't just the serial killers unleashed in Vietnam as part of Project Phoenix, but Project Phoenix was also unleashed at home. The reality is, this is dangerous topics. They want you to believe what everyone believes about Jeffrey Dahmer. They want you to believe the Hollywood version. They want you to believe the Netflix version of Jeffrey Dahmer's life is the most accurate ever. It's the most researched. But it's lies. For those who understand that we live in a world of lies, you will understand this. For those who haven't gotten there yet, it's going to be hard to understand unless you read the book. But the book is scary. You may watch 1,000,000 serial killer movies and enjoy them before you read this scary book by a very meticulous, well-respected researcher in Dave McGowan. I mean, Dave McGowan is the type of writer who has to prove his point over and over and over again. It's like all these details, all these situations, and just the way he puts it together, it's so meticulous and thorough. So, understandably, I get indignant, and others may as well, when people who haven't read McGowan's work are laughing this stuff off. So, without any further ado, here is Dahmer's chapter from Programmed to Kill. And I'm only going to read part of it. You know, if you want to really read this book, you can. It's a free book. If you want to get the PDF, or if you want to support McGowan's family that he left behind, you can buy the actual book itself. Jeffrey Dahmer was born in 1960, son of a research chemist with PPG Industries. Father Lionel Dahmer, Ph.D., who admitted that he, Lionel, as a boy, had been fascinated with fire and the art of bomb making, recalled that at 13 he had wanted to hypnotize a girl so that he could control her entirely. Lionel Dahmer also said that Jeffrey had been molested at the age of 8, purportedly by a neighborhood boy. So Dahmer's father is a rather questionable character who is for some reason saying that Jeffrey was molested by a neighbor. By the age of 10, Jeff was experimenting with dead animals and learning to use acid to dispose of the bodies. In 1975, 3 neighborhood kids found a mutilated dog in the woods behind the Dahmer home. Its decapitated, gutted carcass hanging from a tree. A cross of sticks was nearby. So if you believe this, we've already established that Jeff was performing satanic cults near his own home, kidnapping neighborhood dogs, torturing to death, and then creating satanic rituals or whatever. And so here is another article, apparently. This I found on the Programmed to Kill website. There are numerous stories from the neighborhood about dogs that disappeared. Whether Dahmer had anything to do with them or whether he was content to build his collection with roadkill isn't known. But Jim Klippel, a former next-door neighbor who was about 2 years older than Dahmer, recalled a grisly discovery he made in 1975 when Dahmer was about 15 in the woods about 300 yards from the Dahmer home. Klippel said he and his girlfriend found a dog's head that had been impaled on a stick. Somebody spent a lot of time having fun with that dog, if that's what you want to call it. It was skinned and gutted, and about 100 yards away there had been a large fire and 13 little fires around it. It looked so much like cult worship that it scared us to death. The dog's carcass had been nailed to a tree. I had heard stories in the area about him going around and doing things to animals. I don't know if he did it, Klippel said. He seemed like such a nice, quiet kid. Boy, that's some hell of circumstantial evidence, isn't it? Just so happens that this all happens right behind Dahmer's house at the time when Dahmer, do you want to laugh this off? Do you want to write it off? Feel free, be my guest. Moving on. Now pay attention to this. 3 years later, while on a senior class trip to Washington, D.C., senior class probably 17 years old, 2 years after he did that to the dog in the backyard. Okay? Jeffrey Dahmer, while on a senior class trip to Washington, D.C., Jeffrey Dahmer made a call from a payphone and then announced to his high school classmates, his entire class, he announced to them that he had secured them an appointment to visit the office of the Vice President of the United States. Though his friends naturally were skeptical, Jeffrey did indeed lead them on a tour of Walter Mondale's office, followed by a visit to the office of prominent writer Arnold Buchwald. It has never been explained how the aspiring serial killer had established such impressive contacts in Washington, and it has never been revealed who it was that Dahmer called that day to arrange the meeting with the vice president. Again, when you put this in the context of this book and of the information that's about to be presented about how Dahmer gets off over and over again, he goes to Florida, he gets off. The cops in the system keeps letting him off over and over. Why is that? Is he 007 with a license to kill? A girl who dated Jeffrey briefly during their senior year recalled one date during which a seance was conducted at the Dahmer home. Someone in the group had suggested that it might be a good idea to try and contact Satan. The girl made a hasty exit from the house. Just after Jeffrey's graduation in 1978, his parents filed for divorce, both of them accusing the other of extreme cruelty. Jeffrey later claimed that he killed for the first time that summer. And so I'm going to skip over this. This is the evidence that McGowan is showing you about how he keeps getting off. The bathhouse owners were well aware of Jeffrey's activities, but little, if anything, this sentence could be repeated over and over. Just change bathhouse owners to the cops, the system, the courts. Everybody seemed to be well aware. The military, remember the story of Billy Joe Capshaw? Everybody was well aware of Jeffrey's activities, but he was allowed to continue. Do you want to know? If you don't, then by all means, don't read this book. Okay, so we're just going to zoom down to the end here. If you want to know all the gory details about how Dahmer kept getting let off by the cops, be my guest. I think part of it's covered in the miniseries, so. But they'll never tell you why. They'll never tell you why all those cops were never convicted of any crime. All right. Dahmer, like all collectors, was obsessed with gaining control over his victims. Does it sound like someone? Maybe his father, Lionel Dahmer, a bone collector who was admittedly obsessed with gaining control over people from a very young age, who was a specialist in chemicals, and who conducted seances in the living room with complete strangers. His preferred means of doing so, of disposing of the bodies that accumulated from his failed experiments, was through the use of chemicals, an interest that was acquired perhaps from his research chemist father. Jeff was reportedly working on a home lobotomy procedure. Dahmer has been described as a dabbler in Satanism, but it is likely that he was more than just a dabbler. In his apartment, he had a detailed plan for constructing a satanic altar. The plan incorporated the human skulls and other artifacts that he had been collecting. He told authorities that he believed that by constructing the altar and by consuming the flesh of his victims, he would be infused with special powers and energies that would help him to succeed socially and financially. Oddly enough, in March 1999, the brother of one of Dahmer's victims was found stabbed to death. Police described the young man's death as a ritual sacrifice. What is the final word on Dahmer? All this satanic stuff is just a cover-up. It's not about Satanism. It's not about Satan. It's not about Satanism. That's not what Project Phoenix is about. Dahmer is a mind control victim. Or was he? I don't know. This sounds insane, that he would succeed socially and financially by being a cannibal, and yet he was socially successful. How more socially successful can you be than you make a phone call and get to hang out with the vice president? So was Dahmer just a mind control victim? Or was he something else? I don't know. I do know that this satanic stuff, this goes into very deep, dark, murky territories. When you talk about the Satanism, is it ritual, religion, or is it a scientific experiment? The more you research, the more you'll realize that the line between scientific experiments and occult rituals is sometimes very thin. If you want to just look at this purely rationally, take the occult stuff out of the equation, the Satanism is used as a way to frighten and terrify people. That was the mission of Project Phoenix. That's why they carved swastikas and pentagrams into dead bodies and children. That's why they did the satanic murders, to terrify people. This is about terror and fear. So it's not about so much Satan as this supernatural energy, but Satan is something they can use to control you. And so if that is how people are controlled, through fear, then maybe that does help you socially and financially when you're a fearmonger. The answers here are not going to be satisfactory to anyone who wants a friendly Jeffrey Dahmer that they can watch the videos and be entertained by his story. It's not that you shouldn't be sympathetic to any of these mind control victims. It's the fact that you don't know what the story is and you're being sympathetic to a false narrative. Here are the photos. Dahmer's accomplices try his parole officer for a start. Parole officer never charged, never convicted of any crime. Slain boys' families suing city say officers were Dahmer's accomplices. Reportedly, Dahmer had an entire street gang as accomplices in Milwaukee. Dahmer reportedly made terror phone calls. Because his father's a chemist, Jeff used to take animals and melt them down to the bone. That's a quote from Jeffrey Dahmer's stepmother. And this one, of course, I don't know what grocery store you get costumes like that. They look homemade to me. A little bit off. Not proof of anything. A little bit off given all the other evidence presented to you today. So, you can still believe the Hollywood version if you want to. Or you can read this book. Don't even read the whole book. Just read the first 20 pages. That'll be more than enough. It's overkill. It's always overkill with Dave McGowan. He gives you so much information that you can't even... Just go through as far as the Mark Dutroux case. You don't need to go any further than that. It's the Great Plague.